The German corporal's hand was on his rifle when Jim Dorsett made a decision that would haunt him for 50 years. He stepped between the two groups of armed men in that tiny cabin and said 5 words that should have gotten him killed. "Put your weapons down first." 24 hours earlier, Jim had been trying to kill Germans. Now he was asking them to trust him. The insanity of that moment, standing in a stranger's cabin in the middle of the Ardennes forest, facing 4 enemy soldiers while his best friend bled to death on a bed behind him, should have ended with bullets. Instead, it ended with something far more dangerous. It ended with hope. But that came later. First came the blood. December 23rd, 1940 hours. Jim Dorsett woke to the sound of the world ending. German 80mm artillery shells walked across the ridge where his squad from the 99th Infantry Division had spent the night in frozen foxholes. The barrage lasted 30 minutes. When it stopped, the forest was on fire, and 3 men from his platoon were dead. Jim was 22 years old, from a farm outside Columbus, Ohio. He'd enlisted the day after Pearl Harbor, spent 2 years training, and landed in France 3 months ago. He'd seen combat at Aachen and survived. He thought he understood war. Then the Germans launched their winter offensive, and Jim learned the difference between fighting and dying. The Panzers came through the smoke at 0700, Mark IV tanks, their engines roaring like dragons, crushing trees as they advanced. Jim's lieutenant, a kid from Boston who'd graduated West Point 6 months earlier, ordered them to hold the crossroads near Rocherath. They held for 6 hours. Bazooka teams knocked out 2 tanks. Machine gunners cut down German infantry. But more kept coming, always more. At 1300, the lieutenant took shrapnel to the chest and died calling for his mother. The sergeant, a veteran who'd fought in North Africa, took command and ordered a fighting retreat. Except German infantry had flanked them during the battle. When they tried to fall back, MG-42 fire ripped through the trees. Men dropped screaming, others scattered into the forest. Jim found himself running with 2 soldiers he barely knew, Harry Tennant and Robin Fletcher, with half the Wehrmacht trying to kill them. They ran until their lungs burned and their legs went numb. They ran until the sound of gunfire faded behind them, and the only noise was their ragged breathing and the crunch of boots on frozen ground. When Harry suddenly screamed and went down, Jim thought he'd been shot. Then he saw the jagged piece of shrapnel sticking out of Harry's calf, a souvenir from some long-ago artillery strike buried in the snow. Harry was 31, the oldest man in the squad, a school teacher from Maryland, with a wife and 2 daughters he carried photos of in his breast pocket. The metal had punched clean through his leg. Blood poured out, steaming in the cold air. Jim ripped open a field dressing and wrapped it tight, but the white bandage turned red in seconds. Harry's face went the color of old newspaper. His lips trembled and turned blue. Robin Fletcher knelt beside them, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold his rifle. Robin was 17, had lied about his age to enlist, looked 15 on his best day. He'd been in combat for exactly 8 days and had cried himself to sleep every night Jim had known him. Now he looked at Harry bleeding in the snow and said what they were all thinking. "He's going to die. Oh, God, Jim, he's going to die." Jim knew Robin was right. They were somewhere behind German lines with no map, no radio, no medic, and no idea which direction was safe. The temperature was dropping fast. The sun would set in 3 hours. After that, hypothermia would kill them as surely as bullets. Harry couldn't walk. Carrying him would slow them down. make them easy targets. The rational choice was to leave him, save themselves. Jim looked at Harry's face, at the photos of his daughters tucked in his pocket, at Ed Robin waiting for Jim to make a decision because Jim was 22 and had survived Aachen, which made him the veteran now. "We carry him," Jim said. "We take turns. We find shelter. We figure it out. But we don't leave our people behind, ever, understood?" Robin nodded. They made a stretcher from branches and a shelter half. They carried Harry between them, switching off every 100 yards when their arms gave out. They moved slowly, stopping every 10 minutes to listen for German patrols. Twice they heard voices and lay flat in the snow until the sounds passed. Once they heard a tank engine and hid in a ravine for 20 minutes, barely breathing. After 2 hours, Harry stopped moaning. His eyes went glassy. He was going into shock. Another hour and he'd be dead. That's when Jim saw the smoke. It rose thin and gray through the trees, barely visible against the overcast sky. Smoke meant a fire. Fire meant shelter. Shelter meant a chance. Jim didn't let himself think about who might be tending that fire. German soldiers, yes, civilians who turned them in. It didn't matter. Harry had maybe an hour left. They were out of options. The cabin appeared through the trees like something from a fairy tale. Tiny rough-hewn logs, a stone chimney with smoke curling out. No military vehicles, no signs of troops, just a small wooden building in a forest clearing. Jim approached with his pistol drawn, every nerve screaming this was a trap. He knocked carefully, ready to shoot or run, depending on who answered. The door opened. A woman stood there, maybe 45, wearing a simple dress and an apron. Behind her, a boy with wide eyes. No uniforms, no weapons, just a mother and her son. Jim's German was terrible, learned from a phrase book in desperation, but he managed. "Bitte, please, we are American soldiers. We are lost. My friend, he will die without help, please." The woman's eyes moved from Jim to Robin to Harry, bleeding on the improvised stretcher. Her expression didn't change. She simply stepped aside and gestured them in, quickly, before someone sees. Her name was Elisabeth Vincken. Her son was Fritz, 12 years old. Her husband was Hermann, serving with an anti-aircraft unit in Aachen. She hadn't heard from him in 3 weeks. She'd fled to this hunting cabin with Fritz to escape the bombing of their town. For 3 weeks, they'd survived on stored food and what little she could forage. She'd heard the battle raging through the forest. She'd prayed it would pass them by. Now, 3 American soldiers were in her cabin, bringing the war to her door. Elisabeth worked quickly and without speaking. She cleared the table and helped them lift Harry onto it. She heated water, pulled out a bottle of schnapps, and unwrapped the blood-soaked bandage. The wound was worse than Jim had thought. Infection had already started, red streaks radiating from the puncture. Without antibiotics, Harry would die from sepsis, even if the bleeding stopped. "Hold him," Elisabeth said calmly. Jim and Robin gripped Harry's shoulders. Elisabeth poured schnapps directly into the wound. Harry's scream was animal, pure agony. He thrashed against their grip. Fritz pressed a leather strap between Harry's teeth so he wouldn't bite through his tongue. Elisabeth cleaned the wound methodically, ignoring Harry's muffled screams, and packed it with clean cloth. "He needs a doctor," she said when she finished. "I'm not a nurse. This is all I can do." "It's more than we could do," Jim said. "Thank you." Elisabeth nodded and moved to the fire where a pot simmered. Jim caught the smell. Roasted chicken. His stomach clenched so hard it hurt. They hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. Combat rations had run out. For 12 hours they'd been running on adrenaline and fear. "You will eat," Elisabeth said. It wasn't an offer. It was an order. She served them water first, cold, clean from a bucket by the door. Jim drank like a man in the desert. Then she cut bread, dark and dense, and gave each of them a thick slice. Jim forced himself to eat slowly, even though every cell in his body screamed to devour it. Beside him, Robin ate with tears streaming down his face. "Thank you," Robin whispered. "Thank you so much." Elisabeth said nothing. She simply returned to the fire and stirred the pot. Outside the sun was setting, the forest grew dark, the temperature dropped, and Jim started to think that maybe, impossibly, they might survive. That's when the second knock came. The sound froze everyone. 4 sharp raps, authoritative, demanding. Fritz's face went white. Elisabeth's hand tightened on the spoon. Jim and Robin looked at each other, the same thought in both their minds. Germans. Had to be. No American would be this far behind enemy lines. Jim started to stand, reaching for his pistol on the shelf where Elisabeth had placed it. She turned on him with a fury that stopped him cold. "Sit down," she hissed. "Don't move. Don't speak." The knocking came again, louder. A voice called out in German, "Ist jemand da? Is anyone there? Please, we need help." Elisabeth looked at Jim, at Robin, at Harry unconscious on the bed, at Fritz trembling in the corner. Jim saw her make a decision in real time, watched her shoulders straighten and her jaw set. She crossed to the door and opened it. 4 German soldiers stood in the snow. They were young, maybe 20, exhausted and half frozen. Their uniforms were caked with ice. One had a blood-soaked bandage wrapped around his head. Another's hands shook so badly he could barely hold his rifle. They looked less like conquerors and more like drowning men searching for driftwood. The one with the head wound spoke. "Frau, we are from the 12th SS Panzer. We became separated from our unit during the attack. We've been walking for 2 days. We saw your smoke. Please, we need shelter, just for the night." Elisabeth studied them. Then she stepped aside. "Come in, quickly." They entered gratefully, tracking snow and mud. Then they saw the Americans. Time stopped. Germans stared at Americans. Americans stared back. Hands moved toward weapons. The cabin, warm and safe 2 seconds ago, became a powder keg with 4 lit matches. The German with the head wound, a corporal named Heinz, brought his Kar 98K rifle up smoothly, the barrel centering on Jim's chest. Jim's hand was moving toward his pistol on the shelf. Robin was reaching for his M1 Garand. The other Germans were bringing their weapons to bear. In 3 seconds, everyone would be dead. Elisabeth's voice cracked like a whip. "Stop! All of you! Stop this instant!" Nobody moved. Rifles stayed pointed. Fingers rested on triggers. One nervous twitch, and the cabin would erupt in gunfire that would kill everyone, including Elisabeth and Fritz. That's when Jim Dorset made the decision that defined the rest of his life. He stepped forward, moving slowly, hands visible and empty. He positioned himself directly between the German rifles and his friends, making his body a shield. He looked Heinz in the eye and spoke in careful, broken German. "I am Sergeant Jim Dorset, United States Army. These are my men. We are lost. We are unarmed." That was a lie, but a useful one. My friend is wounded and will die without rest. We mean no harm. We only want to survive until morning." Heinz kept his rifle steady. "You are the enemy." "Today I am. Tomorrow I will be. But right now I am a cold, hungry, scared soldier who wants to live through Christmas, same as you." The German corporal said nothing. His finger rested on the trigger. Jim could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. Kill the Americans, take the cabin by force. Simple, safe, smart. Jim took a breath and made his gamble. "I'm going to take the weapons off that shelf. I'm going to bring them here, to the door, and put them down. Then I'm going to sit back down with my men without guns. If you want to shoot us after that, you can, but I'm betting you don't want to spend Christmas Eve murdering unarmed men in front of a woman and her child." "Jim, no," Robin whispered. Jim ignored him. He moved slowly to the shelf, picked up his pistol and the 2 M1 rifles, and carried them to the door. He placed them on the floor at Heinz's feet. Then he straightened, looked Heinz in the eye, and said one more thing. "Now it's your turn. You can shoot me, take the cabin, and explain to God why you killed unarmed men on Christmas Eve. Or you can put your rifle down. We can all survive the night, and tomorrow we go back to killing each other. Your choice." Silence. Outside, wind moved through the trees. Inside, 7 men with loaded weapons waited to see who would die first. Heinz stared at Jim for what felt like an hour. Then slowly he lowered his rifle and leaned it against the wall beside the American weapons. "You are either the bravest man I've ever met," Heinz said in careful English, "or the stupidest." "Probably both," Jim replied. One by one, the other Germans disarmed. Elisabeth finally released the breath she'd been holding. She pointed at the table. "Sit, all of you. You will eat, you will rest, and you will not kill each other in my house. Do you understand?" They sat, Germans on one side of the small table, Americans on the other. Elisabeth served what she had. 1 rooster, already cooked, divided into impossibly thin portions. 6 potatoes, boiled and cut into slices. Half a loaf of black bread, divided so every man got a piece the size of his thumb. It was pitiful, but it was Christmas Eve dinner, and she served it with dignity. At first, nobody spoke. They ate in silence, each man acutely aware of the enemy sitting 3 feet away. Then one of the younger Germans, a boy named Klaus, who couldn't have been more than 17, said something in hesitant English. Where you from?" Robin, who'd been staring at his plate, looked up surprised. "Pennsylvania, near Pittsburgh." Klaus nodded. "I'm from Bavaria, near Munich. My father has dairy farm, 30 cows. Another German, Joseph, pulled a bottle of wine from his pack. "From France," he said, almost apologetically. "We found it." He uncorked it and took a drink, then passed it to Klaus. Klaus drank and offered it to the Americans. Jim hesitated. This was insane, sharing wine with the enemy. But Heinz was watching, waiting to see if the American who'd asked for trust would show trust in return. Jim took the bottle and drank. The wine was good, better than anything he'd tasted since landing in France. He passed it to Robin. The ice didn't break so much as crack slowly. They talked in fragments of English and German, Fritz translating where he could. Klaus talked about his father's cows. Robin talked about his dog, Buster, a beagle who slept on his bed back home. Joseph showed them a photograph of his girlfriend, a pretty girl with blonde braids. Jim pulled out a picture of his younger brother, Thomas, who was training with the Marines for the Pacific. Heinz studied the photo. He looks like you. Yeah, he's tough though, tougher than me. That's what brothers are for, to be tougher than us. They avoided talking directly about the war. By unspoken agreement, the battle raging outside didn't exist tonight. But eventually, Joseph, half drunk on wine and exhaustion, said what everyone was thinking. This is madness. All of it. We should all go home. The table went quiet. Then Robin, the 17-year-old who'd been crying in foxholes 3 days ago, laughed. It was a bitter, hollow sound. Yeah, we should, but they won't let us, will they? No, Heinz said softly. Our leaders need us to keep killing each other, to prove whatever points they're trying to prove. And we obey because we're soldiers, and that's what soldiers do. Jim looked at Heinz across the table. Did you want this war? No. I wanted to finish university, study engineering, build bridges. Heinz smiled sadly. Instead, I learned to destroy them. The weight of that statement settled over the cabin. 7 young men, none of whom wanted to be here, all trapped by decisions made by old men in distant capitals. Jim felt something twist in his chest, a complicated knot of anger and grief and exhausted recognition. That's when Werner spoke. Werner was the quietest of the Germans, a thin kid with haunted eyes who hadn't said a word since entering. Now he stood abruptly, his chair scraping back. He pointed at Robin and said in German, "My brother died at Normandy. Americans killed him. Why should I sit here and share food with his murderers?" The temperature dropped. Heinz reached for Werner's arm, but the young German shook him off. His face was flushed with wet and something darker. Robin stood slowly, his hand instinctively moving toward where his rifle had been before remembering it wasn't there. "Werner, sit down," Heinz said firmly. "No, they killed my brother. He was 19 years old, and they shot him on a beach, and for what? For nothing." Werner's voice cracked. "And now I'm supposed to smile and drink with them? Pretend we're friends?" Robin's voice was quiet but steady. "My uncle died at Pearl Harbor. He was a mechanic on the Arizona. He burned to death when your allies bombed his ship. So, yeah, I get it. But your brother isn't here. Neither is my uncle. We are. And I'm tired of killing people I don't even hate." "You should hate us," Werner shouted. "We're enemies." "Maybe," Robin said. "But tonight, in this cabin, I don't hate you. I'm just tired and cold and scared, same as you." Werner stared at him, trembling. Then his hand moved toward the door where the weapons leaned. Everything happened at once. Werner grabbed his rifle. Jim lunged forward. Robin tackled Werner from the side. They crashed into the wall. The rifle clattered to the floor. Werner swung wildly, his fist catching Robin in the jaw. Robin hit back, connecting with Werner's eye. Jim grabbed Werner from behind. Heinz and Joseph pulled Robin away. Fritz screamed. Everyone was shouting in 2 languages. Then Elisabeth stepped into the middle of the chaos and slapped Werner across the face so hard the sound echoed like a gunshot. The cabin went silent. Werner stared at her, shocked. Elisabeth's voice was ice and fire. "Enough! All of you, enough!" She turned to Werner, her voice softening but losing none of its intensity. "You think you're the only one who's lost someone? My husband is in Aachen. I haven't heard from him in 3 weeks. American bombs destroyed half my city. My sister and her children were killed in Dresden. I have every reason to hate these boys." She gestured at Jim, Robin, and Harry unconscious on the bed. "And they have every reason to hate you. But if we give in to that hate, if we let it consume us, then what's left? What are we fighting for?" She looked around the cabin at all of them. "Your brother is dead. That is a tragedy, and I grieve for him. But killing these boys won't bring him back. It won't end the war. It won't make anything better. Tomorrow, when you walk out that door, you'll have 1,000 chances to kill Americans. But tonight is holy. Tonight, we remember that before we were soldiers, before we were enemies, we were human beings created by the same God. Can you do that? Can you give me one night of peace?" Werner's shoulders sagged. He looked at Robin, who was bleeding from a split lip, looked at Jim, still holding him back, looked at Heinz and Joseph, watching with sad, tired eyes. Then he looked down at his own hands, trembling and empty. "I'm sorry," Werner whispered. "I'm so sorry." Robin wiped blood from his mouth. He stared at Werner for a long moment. Then, in a gesture that surprised everyone, including himself, he extended his hand. "I'm sorry about your brother, I really am. But he's not here, and we are. And I don't want to spend tonight hating you." Werner looked at the offered hand like it was something alien. Then, slowly, he reached out and took it. They shook once, firmly. Something fundamental shifted in the cabin. The peace before had been fragile, held together by Elisabeth's will and Jim's gamble. Now it was something the soldiers chose for themselves. Elisabeth retrieved her husband's Bible from the shelf. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it to Luke, chapter 2. She began to read in German, her voice steady and clear. "Und es waren Hirten in derselben Gegend auf dem Felde," Fritz translated quietly into English for the Americans. "And there were shepherds in the same country, abiding in the field, keeping watch over their flock by night." The story unfolded in 2 languages. The angel appearing, the shepherds afraid, the journey to Bethlehem, the child in the manger. As Elisabeth read, soldiers from both sides bowed their heads. Some lips moved in prayer. Others simply closed their eyes, perhaps remembering other Christmases, other homes, other lives before the war consumed everything. When she finished, Elisabeth said simply, "Let us pray." They prayed in German and English, Catholic and Protestant, each in their own way, but the prayer was the same: peace, home, survival, an end to the killing. For those few minutes, nationality didn't matter. They were all just men, far from home, hoping to see another sunrise. After the prayer, someone started singing, "Stille Nacht, Heilige Nacht," silent night, holy night. The Germans sang in German. The Americans joined in English. The melody wound together 2 languages, speaking the same hope. Fritz's young voice rose pure and clear above the men. Even Harry, semi-conscious on the bed, moved his lips to the familiar words. When the song ended, Elisabeth served the last of the coffee, a weak substitute made from roasted grain, but hot and somehow comforting. They sat around the dying fire, the cabin warm for the first time all day. Klaus pulled out a harmonica and played German folk songs. Joseph taught Robin a card game. Werner sat quietly in the corner, carving something from a piece of wood with his knife. Jim and Heinz found themselves side by side, watching the others. "Do you have children?" Heinz asked. "No, not married yet. There's a girl back home, but," Jim shrugged, "war got in the way." "When you go home, marry her. Don't wait. Don't let the war steal any more of your life than it already has. You sound like you're speaking from experience. Heinz pulled out a photograph. A young woman with dark hair and a serious expression. Anna. We were engaged when I was conscripted. That was 3 years ago. I write letters, but I don't know if she still waits. She waits, Jim said with certainty. If she loved you enough to say yes, she waits. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Heinz asked the question that had been hanging between them all evening. Tomorrow we leave. We go back to the war. What if we meet again? What if you're in my sights? Jim thought about it carefully. Then you do your duty, and I'll do mine. We're soldiers. That's what soldiers do. But tonight isn't tomorrow. Tonight we're not enemies. Tonight we're just men who shared Christmas in a cabin, and nobody can take that from us, no matter how many more battles we fight. Heinz nodded slowly. You're a good man, Jim Dorset. In another life, we might have been friends. We are friends, Jim said, just for tonight. But that's something. Heinz smiled, the first real smile Jim had seen from him. He extended his hand. Jim gripped it. They shook, not as soldiers or enemies, but as two men acknowledging an impossible moment of grace. As midnight approached, the soldiers arranged themselves for sleep. The cabin was too small for everyone to lie down, so they took turns. Americans on one side, Germans on the other, not from hostility but from habit. Weapons remained stacked by the door, untouched. Elisabeth and Fritz took the corner by the bar. Harry remained on the bed, his fever finally broken, sleeping peacefully for the first time in 2 days. Jim took first watch with Joseph. They sat by the embers, not speaking much, just keeping each other company. Joseph showed Jim how to roll cigarettes the German way. Jim shared the last of his American chocolate, which Joseph ate slowly, savoring every bite. This is good chocolate, Joseph said. Hershey's, from Pennsylvania, Robin's home state. When the war ends, I want to go to America, see this Pennsylvania, taste this chocolate, fresh from the factory. When the war ends, Jim said, you should do exactly that. Look me up, I'll show you around Ohio. We've got good chocolate there, too. Joseph smiled. I will. That's a promise. They shook hands. Then Joseph lay down to sleep, and Heinz took his place for the next watch. He and Jim sat together in the dark, listening to the wind outside and the soft breathing of sleeping men. Thank you, Heinz said quietly, for taking the gamble, for trusting us. I didn't have much choice. You had every choice. You could have fought. Probably would have killed some of us before we killed you, but you chose this instead. Heinz gestured at the sleeping soldiers, former enemies, resting peacefully in the same room. That took more courage than fighting. Jim didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. They sat in silence until dawn broke cold and gray. Morning came too quickly. Elisabeth woke first and prepared what little remained. Hot water, a few slices of bread. As the soldiers stirred awake, reality returned. They gathered their gear slowly, reluctantly. The spell was breaking. At the door they paused. The Americans would go west, the Germans east. Back to their lines, back to the war. Jim looked at Heinz. Which direction are you heading? East, toward our lines. You? West, Heinz nodded. Good. Then perhaps we won't meet again. I hope not, Jim said honestly. But if we do, we will do what soldiers do. But we will remember this night. Before leaving, Heinz pressed something into Elisabeth's hand. A small wooden cross, carved carefully. "I made this for my mother last Christmas, but I think God wants you to have it, for reminding us what we were fighting for, or should have been fighting for." Elisabeth's eyes filled with tears. "God bless you, Heinz. God bless all of you." Werner approached Robin and extended his hand one more time. "I'm sorry for everything." Robin gripped it firmly. "We're good. Stay safe out there. You too." The groups separated. Germans moved east into the forest, Americans west. Before disappearing into the trees, both groups stopped and turned. Across 30 yards of snow, 7 soldiers raised their hands, a final salute, not military, just human. A gesture of farewell between men who'd shared something impossible. Then the forest swallowed them, and they were enemies again. Jim, Robin, and Harry made it back to American lines on December 27th. They told their story to the commanding officer, who listened skeptically and told them to forget it. "Nobody wants to hear about friendly Germans," he said. "Keep it to yourselves." So they did. Jim returned to combat, fought through the rest of the Bulge, pushed into Germany, and came home in 1946. He married his girl, raised 3 kids, became a shop teacher in Columbus. He never spoke about the cabin. The memory was too strange, too precious, too painful to risk having someone dismiss it or not understand. Until January 1973, when his wife, Margaret, read a magazine article aloud over breakfast, "Truce in the Forest" by Fritz Vincken. As she read, describing a cabin, a Christmas Eve, German and American soldiers sharing a meal, Jim's coffee cup began to shake. "That's me," he said when she finished. "That cabin, that woman, Elisabeth, that was me." Margaret stared at him. "Jim, you never told me." "I didn't think anyone would believe it." He contacted Reader's Digest. They put him in touch with Fritz Vincken, now living in Hawaii. Through Fritz, he found Heinz Müller in Germany. They exchanged letters carefully at first, tentative, unsure, then more openly. Heinz had survived the war, married Anna, become an engineer, building the bridges he'd dreamed of. Joseph had died in 1940, killed in the final weeks. Klaus had lost both legs to a mine but lived in Munich with his family. Werner had never come home. Robin Fletcher, tracked down in Oregon, remembered everything. Harry Tennant, retired in Maryland, with his daughters grown, wept when Jim called. In November 1996, they arranged to meet in Washington, D.C., at the newly opened World War II Memorial. Jim flew in from Ohio with Margaret and his children. Robin drove from Oregon with his wife. Harry came from Maryland with both his daughters. Heinz and Klaus flew from Germany with their families. They were old men now, in their 70s, gray and bent by time and life. When Jim saw Heinz walking toward him across the Memorial Plaza, 52 years collapsed into nothing. He saw the young corporal with the bandaged head, standing in a cabin with a rifle, making the choice to trust. Without a word, they embraced. 2 enemies who'd chosen humanity over hate for one impossible night. A reporter from the Washington Post photographed them, old soldiers, crying openly, holding each other like brothers. The photo ran on the front page the next day. The headline read, "Christmas Truce, Former Enemies Reunited After 52 Years." The story spread. CNN covered it. Network News picked it up. Letters poured in from veterans across America and Germany, sharing their own stories of moments when the war stopped and humanity broke through. Jim gave interviews, always saying the same thing: we were enemies. That's what war is. But for one night, we weren't. For one night, a woman reminded us we were all somebody's son. And if we could do that in the middle of the worst battle of the war, in a frozen forest with every reason to hate each other, then maybe there's hope for the rest of us. Maybe peace isn't something governments sign on paper. Maybe it's something ordinary people choose, one moment at a time. Heinz, standing beside him, added, "Elisabeth told us that night was holy. I didn't understand then, but now I do. Holy means seeing God in your enemy. Holy means choosing mercy when vengeance would be easier. Holy means a mother protecting all her children, even the ones who came to her door wearing the wrong uniform." Elisabeth Vincken had died in 1983, never knowing her story would reach millions. But Fritz made sure her legacy lived on. Every Christmas Eve, he gathered his family and told the story. Jim's grandchildren learned it by heart. Heinz's great-grandchildren in Germany heard it each year. And somewhere, in churches and living rooms across America and Germany, veterans told their own children about the Christmas when war stopped. Just for one night. Just long enough to remember that the enemy wears a uniform, but underneath, he has a mother who loves him, a girl who waits for him. Dreams of bridges and farms and dogs named Buster. The cabin in the Ardennes is gone now, reclaimed by the forest, but the memory remains. Every Christmas Eve, in small ceremonies at veterans' halls and memorial parks, someone reads the story aloud. Candles are lit. Silent Night is sung in 2 languages, and for a few minutes, the hope kindled in a frozen cabin on Christmas Eve 44 burns bright again. Because Christmas isn't about victory, it's about hope. And hope, once shared between enemies in the darkest hour, never completely dies. It lives on in the children and grandchildren of those who were there. It lives in every choice to see humanity in the other. It lives in the simple truth that even in war, even in hate, even in the frozen heart of winter, light can break through. And sometimes that light is enough.